Viktor, the Suikoden world's most lovable vagabond. We all know Viktor's backstory. Before joining the Liberation Army, he wandered the world working as a mercenary while hoping to gain his revenge against the vampire Neclord who destroyed his hometown of North Window. But many of you may not know the full details of those events as the games only provided us with that brief summary. Viktor's backstory was explored in depth in a short story titled Ghostly Signposts in the Dark, which was included in the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 1, a book that released in Japan in August 2000. This is the second longest short story in the entire collection, coming in at 80 pages. I already covered the key events of this short story in the History of Dunan video, so some of you may recognize parts of this story, but this video will be covering the story in much more detail. The story takes place around the solar year 449, when Viktor was 21 years old. The story begins with Viktor arriving in South Window City to purchase some medicine for his mother Helen, who had recently injured her back. While there, he was also picking up some bits and pieces that were requested by the villagers, as well as some plant roots for his grandmother's health. Viktor then met a merchant called Ko Long and invited him back to North Window to conduct business. However, the real reason Viktor invited Ko Long to North Window was because he didn't want to carry everything home and he was hoping to hitch a free ride on a carriage. Ko Long convinced Viktor to buy a silver pendant from him. Viktor was reluctant, but he was moved by Ko Long telling him that if you give this to a woman you like, she'll find happiness. On their journey back to North Window, Viktor thought about who he'd give the pendant to, and two women came to mind. One was Annabelle, the daughter of Darrow, the mayor of Mews. Viktor had met her years ago while working as a mercenary, and the two got along extremely well, being able to run their mouths and engage in banter without any worries of offending each other. However, Annabelle was quite stubborn and headstrong, and whenever there was a conflict of opinion, Viktor would simply give up. The other woman was Daisy, who Viktor had known since he was a small child. When Daisy's parents passed away, she was taken in by Viktor's family. Daisy acted more like an older sister to Viktor, caring for his injuries while scolding him for always being so reckless. Viktor then decided that he'd give the pendant to Daisy as he'd never seen her wear any jewellery since she was always working. Daisy had never had a partner before, and Viktor figured that if she could adorn herself in some jewellery, that maybe she could find someone. The story then cuts to North Window, to Daisy and Viktor's mother Helen. Daisy was applying some balm to Helen's lower back to treat the injury she sustained half a month ago when she slipped while gathering water. It made Helen feel old, and she began to think back to her husband who died 2 years ago. Her husband was the captain of the North Window 4th Division, and he died 2 years ago during a battle with the Scarlet Moon Empire. Helen then turned her thoughts to her two sons, Viktor and Will, and began to worry that now that they're all grown up, that they no longer need her. Helen had always wished that Daisy would marry Viktor, but she never spoke publicly about it before. Helen waited until Daisy finished applying the balm before asking her, "What do you think of Viktor?" The comment took Daisy off guard and left her confused. Helen then commented how her mind would be at ease if Daisy and Viktor got together. But before Daisy could respond, an old woman's voice could be heard coming from the next room. It was Martha, Viktor's grandmother. She commented that ever since they were kids, she's always thought that Daisy and Viktor would get married. Daisy's cheeks began to heat up as her face turned bright red. Even though Viktor and Daisy grew up like siblings, Daisy has always secretly dreamt of being with Viktor, and she even turned down proposals from two men in the hopes that her dream might come true. Even though Daisy had yet to respond to Helen and Martha were getting ahead of themselves, and they were already discussing how Daisy and Viktor could divide their household chores once they got married. They both turned to Daisy at the same time, expecting an answer, but Daisy was at a loss for words. Just then, the door flew open as Viktor's younger brother Will had returned home from training at the castle. Will wanted to know when Viktor was returning home, to which Helen replied in a day or two. While Will and Helen were speaking, Daisy grabbed an empty laundry basket and left the house to gather the laundry that was airing on the shore of Lake Dunan. Daisy enjoyed the view of the lake, and as she was taking in the scenery, she heard a man's voice coming from behind her saying, "Good evening, young lady." Daisy turned around to see a man with oily purple hair, red eyes, pale skin, and sharp fangs peeking out of his grinning lips. A cold chill ran down Daisy's spine. She was terrified by his appearance and wanted to run, but her legs went limp. Daisy asked the man who he was, and the man bowed and introduced himself as Neclord. He commented how pleasantly surprised he was to meet such a sweet girl under this beautiful sunset, and that he wishes to make her his 65th bride. Daisy was disgusted by Neclord's comments, and filled with anger, she yelled out that she was going to marry Viktor. Neclord then remarked how much he likes strong-willed women as his eyes began to glow red. Daisy began to lose control of her body as if mesmerized and felt herself drawn to Neclord. She tried to call out Viktor's name, but no sound came out. The story then cuts back to Viktor and Kolong traveling on the road. Viktor was relaxing in the back of the carriage, enjoying the view of the rising moon. Kolong spotted smoke in the distance and told Viktor it's coming from the direction of his village. Viktor told him to stop the carriage. He then grabbed one of the horses and rode towards North Window. As he approached the entrance to the village, Viktor hopped off his horse and saw a man staggering as he walked. As he approached closer, he noticed it was Kite, the gatekeeper. Viktor called out to him and asked him what's happening. Kite groaned while raising his arms and lunging at Viktor. Viktor was caught off guard and fell to the ground, barely avoiding the attack. Viktor tried calling out to him again, but Kite once again lunged at him. This time Viktor managed to dodge the attack. Viktor wondered what was going on and drew his sword, hoping that if he inflicted some pain, that Kite might snap out of it and come back to normal. Viktor continued dodging Kite's attacks and poked him with the tip of his sword, but Kite was unfazed and continued attacking Viktor. Viktor then realized that something strange was going on. Kite felt no pain and showed no emotion. His face was dark red with a lifeless expression, almost like he was possessed by something. It was like he was an undead creature from an old tale. Viktor knew it was no longer Kite, but he couldn't so easily raise his sword against his old friend. Viktor began thinking back on his memories of Kite. As the gatekeeper, Kite couldn't leave the village and always looked forward to Viktor's stories whenever he returned from his travels. Distracted by his thoughts of Kite, Viktor suddenly felt a sharp pain as Kite was biting his shoulder. Viktor tried to push Kite's body away, but the more he struggled, the more Kite's teeth dug into Viktor and tore through his flesh. Wincing in pain, Viktor drove his sword through Kite's chest, causing Kite to stop moving and slump over Viktor's body. Even though it was no longer the Kite he once knew, Viktor couldn't believe that he had to kill his old friend. Kolong had caught up to Viktor some time ago and had been silently watching in fear from a distance. He grabbed some medicine and bandages from the carriage, and while treating Viktor's wounds, he commented that the person Viktor killed didn't appear to be alive. Viktor told Kolong to travel east to Couscous to seek help and then started sprinting into the village. North Window was up in flames. Thick black smoke and flames swelled in the burning homes. The night sky turned red as the wind scattered the sparks from the flames. Viktor covered his face with his arms as the smoke, the burnt air, and the pungent smell of burning flesh made it impossible to breathe. Viktor spotted the villagers in the streets, all turned just like Kite was. Some of the villagers were killing each other. Others were crawling along the ground, eating chunks of meat and bloody flesh from the corpses of the villagers. Some were missing limbs, and the fortunate ones were charred corpses. Viktor sprinted down the street, easily avoiding the slow-moving villagers, and made his way towards his home. As he turned the corner, he spotted his family's house. No flames or smoke were present, and he felt a sense of relief, wondering if he arrived on time. Viktor opened the door and spotted his grandmother Martha laying lifeless on the floor as his brother Will and his mother Helen were eating each other's bodies. He arrived too late. Viktor staggered backwards out of the house, collapsing against the wall. He had seen terrible things on the battlefield during his time as a mercenary, but he had never seen anything as horrific as this. Helen then exited the house, and Victor watched as she shuffled her way across the street. The street soon began to fill with the monstrous villagers as they surrounded Helen, and Victor spotted a young man grabbing her. Even though she was no longer his mother, the only thought in his head was that he needed to rescue her. Victor then stood up, grabbing his sword, and charged the villagers, and without any hesitation, he began cutting down everyone and anyone who blocked his path. He no longer felt any empathy for them as he realized they were no longer human. No matter how many times he cut the villagers down, they kept getting back up and attacking him. After cutting down the man who grabbed his mother, he then spotted his mother's lifeless body in a pool of blood. Victor then flew into a frenzy and began slashing, slicing and stabbing the villagers until they no longer moved. Victor then made his way through the streets of North Window, cutting down everything he could see until nothing remained. He then stood alone in the middle of the street, his entire body covered in the blood of the dead villagers. Just then, he heard Daisy's voice call out his name. Victor turned around and was relieved that she was still human, but he soon spotted the man standing next to her. Neclord introduced himself and Victor was horrified. He thought vampires were a myth. He asked Neclord what he was planning to do to Daisy, to which Neclord replied that he planned to make her his wife and that he turned all of the villagers into zombies as entertainment for the wedding. Daisy urged Victor to run away and save himself, but Victor demanded that Neclord set her free. Neclord began to laugh as he let go of Daisy, and as she tried to run to Victor, Victor told her to stay back, that he was going to kill Neclord. Neclord, offended by Victor's comments that he could be killed by a mere human, threatened to kill Victor. Victor charged Neclord and swung his sword with all his might, but his sword flew right through Neclord as countless bats began to flap their wings. Victor charged again, swinging his sword at Neclord, but the result was the same. Neclord then chanted to the moon rune to manifest its power. A pale spear then rained down from the sky and pierced Victor's body, followed by a blinding flash of light and an explosive roar that shook the earth. Daisy rushed to Victor's side, grabbing and shaking him while calling his name over and over again, but Victor didn't move. Daisy couldn't stop crying. It was only hours ago that she thought her dream of marrying Victor might come true, and now he lays lifeless in her arms. Neclord commanded Daisy to stop crying and to come to his side as his bride. The thought of being his bride disgusted her. Daisy slowly raised her tear-soaked face and told Neclord that his bride should die. She then picked up Victor's sword, pressing the hilt against the ground, and drove her throat through the tip of the blade. As Daisy took her own life, Neclord sighed, transformed into a bat, and flew off into the night. Sometime later, Victor awoke to the sound of water dripping as a woman was squeezing a wet cloth into a tub of water. Victor recognized the woman. It was Barbara. Barbara was from North Window, but she moved to Ryube village 3 years ago after marrying a man from there. Victor asked where he was, and she told him that they were at the inn in Couscous, that he was brought here 2.5 days ago. Victor shook his head as if he didn't remember. Victor then asked what she was doing here, and Barbara told him that she was returning home to visit her parents in North Window after leaving her husband. But when she arrived in Couscous, news had just spread of what happened in North Window. Victor realized that it wasn't just a bad dream, that it all really happened. His home, his family, the villagers, they were all gone. He questioned why and how he was still alive. Barbara informed him that the guards spotted him laying in a pale white light. She then pulled a sacrificial Genso that was split in two out of Victor's pack. Victor mentioned that he had bought it in South Window at Daisy's request. He then began to cry and asked Barbara if she knew where Daisy was. Barbara then told Victor that the body of a young woman was found beside him, having committed suicide with his sword in her hands. Victor was in disbelief and knew it had to have been Daisy, as none of the other villagers had swords. Barbara then asked what happened to the village, and Victor responded that a vampire named Neclord attacked the village and burned it to the ground. Barbara then wondered what they'd do next, with Victor having nowhere to go now that their hometown was destroyed. Just then there was a knock on the door. Barbara opened the door and a man entered asking for Viktor. He then signaled for another person to enter the room. It was Annabelle. Annabelle walked over to Viktor's bed and offered her sympathies for what happened to his village. She then informed him that she was heading up a task force to investigate what happened to North Window and that she'd appreciate his cooperation. A few days later, Annabelle's task force arrived in North Window. Most of the undead villagers had already been defeated by Viktor, which made their investigation go smoothly. Only a handful of zombies remained inside the castle, which were swiftly defeated by the monks who accompanied them by using their resurrection runes. Viktor arrived shortly after and began digging graves for all of the villagers. Annabelle offered to help, but Viktor refused any assistance in burying the dead, claiming that he had to perform the memorial service for everyone in the village by himself. When the sun began to go down, the investigation team camped just outside the village, and Ko Long, who had been accompanying the investigators as a witness, decided to depart for business reasons. Viktor remained inside the village with a torch in one hand and a shovel in the other. Annabelle followed him from a distance, and after following him for a while, Viktor stopped in the center of the village by the body of a young woman who, unlike the other villagers he had buried, hadn't turned into a zombie. Annabelle wondered who it might be. She didn't know if it was a family member or a lover, but she figured that she must have been very important to Viktor and he didn't want to be seen burying her body. When he was done burying Daisy, Viktor pulled out the pendant he bought from Ko Long and placed it on her grave. Annabelle approached Viktor, attempting to console him and raise his spirits by telling him what a good person he is and that she's sure the people of the village would be happy that he was able to hold a memorial for them. Viktor reacted negatively to Annabelle's comments, pointing out how he couldn't help anyone and that he had to kill everyone with his own hands. Annabelle regretted her choice of words, realizing she shouldn't have opened her mouth. Some days later, Viktor was in South Window, spending his days petitioning at the town hall for them to set up a team to hunt down Neclord, but all they offered him was some money and their condolences. Viktor then spent his evenings drinking away his sorrows at the Lion's Fang Inn. One evening while getting drunk, Zamji, the tavern owner, tried to convince Viktor to stop drinking. Zamji was previously a soldier in the South Window Army and recognized why Viktor was drinking so hard. Government officials were declaring the incident at North Window to be a hoax, but after seeing the state of mind that Viktor was in, Zamji knew that wasn't the case. As the night went on, customers began to leave the inn, and Zamji began taking all of the customers' empty bowls and cups into the kitchen. While Zamji was in the kitchen, 4 men in South Window military attire approached Viktor, asking him about what happened in North Window, that they had heard rumors of zombies. Their incessant questioning annoyed Viktor, but Viktor remained silent. His silence angered the men, who began quizzing him about the money he received and wondered what he was doing with all that money. They then began calling it a cover-up, that there were no zombies, that Viktor made up the story after slaughtering the villagers. They then accused Viktor of being the so-called zombie and for being in league with vampires. Viktor lost control and swung at one of the men, punching him to the floor. Taken by surprise, the other 3 men then grabbed Viktor and began to beat him. Viktor was too drunk to fight back from all of his heavy drinking and fell to the floor. Zamji heard the ruckus coming from the inn and rushed out of the kitchen. He shouted at the men to stop, but the soldiers refused to listen. Zamji then grabbed the soldiers by their arms and pulled them away from Viktor. The men then told Zamji that he better be quiet unless he wants a beating too. The man that Viktor had punched then took a swing at Zamji, but Zamji easily avoided the punches, grabbing the man by the throat and throwing him to the floor. Another soldier then attempted to punch Zamji, but Zamji caught his arm and twisted it upwards. The remaining 2 soldiers reached for their swords, but Zamji scared them into standing down by revealing that he served in the Black Lion Corps, an elite unit within the South Window Army who were legendary for their exploits in battle when they fought against the Highland Army during the Great Offensive, as well as against the Scarlet Moon Empire. The soldiers immediately lost their will to fight, placed their money on the counter to pay for their drinks, and sheepishly backed out of the inn. Zamji had only retired from the Black Lion Corps and military service as he suffered an injury to his left leg which left him with a limp. Zamji then picked up Viktor and took him to a small room behind the kitchen. Zamji placed Viktor down on the bed and told him he can sleep it off. Viktor apologized for the trouble as Zamji left the room. Viktor, who was unable to control his emotions, pressed his face into the pillow and began to cry. 2 weeks later, tensions between South Window and Two River began to rise when a decomposing head was delivered to South Window City Hall along with a letter marked with the seal of Two River. The letter stated that Two River would welcome Neclord and plan to conquer South Window, and that the destruction of North Window was the first step. At first, city officials considered it to be a sick joke, but as the existence of Neclord was kept a secret, and the decomposed head delivered with the letter was real, it began to cause a panic among city officials. They sent a messenger to Two River to confirm the authenticity of the message, but the messenger was killed and his body was returned. South Window took this to be an official declaration of war and immediately began preparing their army for battle. Around the same time, Two River received a letter with a formal declaration of war bearing the seal of South Window. During those 2 weeks, Viktor had begun working the bar at Zamji's Lion's Fang Inn. Zamji's wife and daughter had warmly welcomed him, and despite being annoyed by Zamji's foul mouth, the kindness they were showing him was slowly bringing the old bright and cheerful Viktor back to life. Viktor and Zamji were outside the inn arguing loudly about a wine barrel. Annabelle was walking through the main street of South Window and heard a familiar voice shouting. She walked towards the voice and found Viktor carrying a wine barrel. The two went inside the inn and sat at the back of the tavern. Zamji brought them cold drinks and teased Viktor about having such a beautiful friend. Viktor shooed him away, calling him annoying. Seeing Viktor acting more like his old self filled Annabelle with relief. Viktor wondered why she had returned, as her investigation into North Window should have long been over by now, and even if the investigation had somehow dragged on, surely the deputy mayor of Mews would have more important things to do than linger around in another state. Viktor bluntly asked her what happened and why she was here. Annabelle felt that Viktor could see right through her, so she explained the situation to him. She told Viktor that relations between South Window and Two River had soured. She told him about the letter, the zombie head, and what happened to the messenger sent to Two River, that the South Window military were calling out for revenge after the destruction of North Window, and that Lord Grandmayor had decided to go to war, a war which could lead to the collapse of the city-states. Grandmayor had advised Annabelle to return home to Mews until Mews's position had been officially decided, as her continued presence could be perceived as Mews supporting South Window. Viktor asked her why she didn't take Grandmayor's advice, and she told him that she had sent a report to her father and that she didn't want to return to Mews without first doing everything she could to prevent the war. Annabelle had conducted her own research into the situation. She had secretly hired a spy to look into the matter and found that the Two River Army had made no movements until they received a declaration of war from South Window. She then suspected this to be a plot of Highland or the Scarlet Moon Empire to weaken the city-states, but neither nation were making any abnormal movements. Viktor thought the whole situation was strange. After seeing the hate in Neclord's eyes, he knew there was no way he would ever team up with humans. He also knew that if Neclord was in Two River, the city would be crawling with zombies. Viktor thought the letter South Window received made no sense and that the letter was quite suspicious and that something or someone else was behind everything happening. Zamji, who was eavesdropping on their conversation, chimed in by saying if they think there's some kind of conspiracy at play, they're probably right. Annabelle asked both Viktor and Zamji to forget everything she just said, as she didn't want to involve civilians in the matter. Viktor insisted there was no way he was going to stay out of it, seeing as Neclord's name was involved, and Zamji informed her that as a former soldier of the Black Lion Corps, she didn't need to worry about him, that she might even be able to use his contacts from his time in the military to get more information. Later that night, Viktor was drinking alone as he was unable to fall asleep. A month had passed since the destruction of North Window, and Viktor hadn't forgotten the events of that night. He began to wonder if Neclord was really in Two River, what could he even do about it? Victor's hand began trembling and he didn't know if it was out of fear or anger. He wanted to avenge the people of his village, but he didn't want to waste the life he felt Daisy had given him thanks to having her sacrificial Genso on him the night of the incident. 3 days later, Viktor, Zamji and Annabelle met in the tavern to share all of the information they had found. Most of what they had found was idle gossip and nothing concrete about the war itself, but Zamji began explaining to Annabelle how he and Viktor had heard rumours of how an engraver who makes souvenirs in Couscous had recently made a fortune. Zamji found it suspicious that an engraver who sells souvenirs would see a sharp uptick in business with rumours of war spreading. Viktor didn't think there was anything to it and the two began to argue. Annabelle tried to defuse the argument by telling them that she didn't find much useful information either. The trio continued talking about the investigation, and Zamji explained that his informants have been looking into gambling halls, black markets, and even a place called House of the Goddess, which appears to be a brothel, but that isn't outright confirmed. Viktor called him a fool, and Annabelle gave them both a frosty glare. Zamji then took his leave to prepare the tavern and sent Viktor out on a task to buy something for him. As Viktor was walking down the main street, he overheard some soldiers talking about how good their new equipment was. That the South Window Army has been replacing all of their old equipment and weapons, and that the army is preparing and replacing equipment a lot faster than usual. He then overheard some of the local women complaining about the war. One of the women commented that some people's trade is war and that they're happy when war breaks out. Viktor began to think back to his conversation with Annabelle about how suspicious the circumstances were, how suspicious the letter was, and that someone must be behind what's happening. Viktor thought to himself, who benefits the most from war? Mercenaries, blacksmiths, weapons dealers, and merchants. The sign of an armour shop caught Viktor's eye and he wandered inside. The armourer called out to Viktor in a friendly manner, trying to convince him to buy some armour, claiming that they'd been getting stock in early. Viktor asked what he meant and the armourer revealed that he knew about the war before it began. Viktor played along, claiming that he knew too, and asked how long the armourer knew. The armourer grinned, saying that he found out about 20 days ago. Viktor started piecing it together. That was around the same time that the letter supposedly from Two River was delivered to South Window. Viktor and the armourer continued talking about the war, and the armourer revealed that his stock came from a group of arms dealers who always appear before a war starts and that they're currently camped near the town of Couscous. Viktor remembered Zamji's comments about the souvenir merchant from Couscous who recently made a fortune and began to wonder if Zamji was right all along. Viktor began to wonder if an engraver could also make fake seals and forge letters, and suspected that the reason he recently made his fortune is because he must have been paid a lot of money to create forgeries to help provoke a war. This was of course still speculation, but Viktor felt it all fit together. Viktor returned to the tavern to inform Annabelle and Zamji of his findings. Annabelle revealed that she had her subordinates look into the engraver that Zamji mentioned earlier. They discovered that an arms dealer had been frequently visiting his home and that they're currently monitoring him. Okay, so they took a little liberty with how time works here. Viktor only took a walk down the main street and then stopped in an armour shop for a conversation. He wasn't gone long enough for Annabelle to dispatch men to Couscous, have them investigate the claims and send word back. But anyway, Viktor and Annabelle headed for City Hall to seek an audience with Grandmere. They explained their findings to him and encouraged him to review the letter and to postpone dispatching the South Window Army. Grandmere tells them that it's too late for that and he can't hold off on dispatching the army as he just received reports that the Two River Army is already on the march. Annabelle continued her attempts to convince Grandmere to stand down, with no luck. Then Viktor, who had been silent up until this point, stepped forward and requested that Grandmere lend them some horses. If he truly wants to stop the war, they might still be able to prevent it. Grandmere agreed to Viktor's request and allowed them to take some horses from the stables. After Viktor and Annabelle left City Hall, Grandmere received word from the commander of the South Window Army that their troops were ready to march, and Grandmere gave the order. Victor, Annabelle and Zamji all rode out for Couscous immediately, and after travelling all day and all night, the trio finally arrived in Couscous and made their way straight to the engraver's house without resting. They arrived just in time as the engraver realised he was being watched and was attempting to sneak out the back window. Victor pulled him back inside and tied him up with a rope and began interrogating him. The man was tight-lipped and refused to answer any of their questions, but as soon as Victor drew his sword and pressed it against his neck, he confessed to everything. The man claimed that the arms dealers visited his home and threatened him, forcing him to make counterfeit seals of South Window and Two River. He said that he didn't want to, but the money they offered him to create the counterfeit seals was too high. He then boasted about the quality of his work. Annabelle then ordered her men to search for the arms dealers, who soon arrived with news that the arms dealers are camped on the outskirts of town and that they're planning on departing soon in search of their next war. The trio rushed out of town and made their way towards the arms dealers' camp. As they approached the camp, they spotted several large tents the size of storerooms, which were surrounding a large wooden barracks the size of two houses. This building was crudely constructed, as if it was hastily put together in half a day. The trio approached the barracks and Victor peeked inside through a gap in the wall. He spotted 7 men inside who appeared to be drinking. One man in particular caught Victor's eye. He recognized the merchant Ko Long. Zamji wanted to peek inside to see what was going on, but Victor told him to keep quiet as Annabelle pressed her finger against her lips to shush them. The three then listened in silence, hoping to hear what the men inside were talking about. The arms dealers were celebrating their success and enjoying some drinks while dividing up the money they made. Ko Long interjected, reminding them not to forget about his role, that it was his plan that made them so much money, and that he wants his agreed upon 10% cut. The leader of the group then handed Ko Long a sack of potch along with a drink. The mastermind behind the war and the mystery of why Neclord's name was in the letter was finally solved. It was all Ko Long. Ko Long knew about North Window as he was with Victor at the time of the attack. He also accompanied Annabelle while she was investigating what happened to North Window and overheard the name Neclord from some of the soldiers. He then created a plot to provoke South Window and Two River into going to war and sold the story to the arms dealers. Annabelle whispered to Zamji that there appears to be 7 men inside, that they're at a disadvantage and they should call her men before going further. But Victor, whose body was now trembling in anger, stormed inside the building. Annabelle called out for him to wait, but Zamji followed Victor inside, realizing that they now have no choice. Annabelle was hesitant, but she too would follow after Victor. Victor confronted Ko Long, who was surprised to see him. He threatened to take Ko Long in as the man who caused the war. Victor's words made the arms dealers panic, and 2 of them rushed him with their weapons drawn. Zamji caught up to Victor and they each took one of the men. Victor quickly disarmed the man attacking him and slashed his unprotected torso with his sword, while Zamji swept the leg of the man attacking him and then stabbed him in the chest with his spear. Annabelle caught up to them and asked if they were okay. Victor ordered her to stay back as he moved towards Ko Long. The remaining arms dealers seemed to snap out of their drunkenness after witnessing 2 of their comrades so easily defeated. They then grabbed their weapons and charged the trio. The leader of the group attacked Victor, 2 men attacked Zamji, and a 4th man attacked Annabelle. Annabelle wasn't very skilled with a sword and she was struggling against the man attacking her. The man easily evaded her attacks and read all of her moves. He then began taunting her in a vulgar manner, suggesting that she go to bed with him. His words got no reaction out of Annabelle, who stayed focused on the fight, waiting for any gap in his movements to strike. Meanwhile, Zamji was struggling in his battle against the 2 men he was fighting, as he kept losing his focus as he was worried about Annabelle, who was struggling behind him. Zamji was growing frustrated as every time he was about to go on the offensive, he was forced back on the defensive by the 2nd man. He deflected their attacks as best as he could, but sustained some minor injuries. One of the men then noticed that Zamji had a bad leg. The fight then cuts to Victor, who is facing off against the leader of the arms dealers. Victor was hoping to defeat him quickly as he wanted to catch Ko Long as fast as possible. However, the man he was facing was no easy opponent. The man's sword was much larger and longer than Victor's, and he appeared to be quite experienced with a sword. He dodged all of Viktor's attacks with ease, but Viktor caught him off guard by kicking him in the stomach. Viktor then headed straight for Kolong, who had been cowering in fear since the fight started. Kolong looked up to find Viktor standing over him and began trembling as he tried to crawl away, fearing that Viktor was going to kill him. Viktor then slashed the tendons in Kolong's leg with his sword. Viktor was then attacked from behind by the leader of the arms dealers, who claim Viktor got lucky with his kick. The two clash swords as the fight cuts back to Annabelle. Annabelle was struggling, she was on the verge of being defeated, and just when she was ready to give up, she heard Hauser's voice call out her name from behind her, followed by an arrow flying past her aimed at the man she was fighting. The arrow missed, but it frightened the man just enough for him to momentarily drop his guard, which allowed Annabelle to thrust her sword through his shoulder. Hauser stepped forward and stood beside Annabelle along with some soldiers from Muse. Hauser then, without hesitation, cut the arms dealer down. The fight then cuts back to Zamji, who finally found his opening. He knocked one of the men to the ground and killed the other by throwing his spear into the man's chest. Meanwhile, the fight between Viktor and the leader of the arms dealers came to an end when Viktor disarmed him by slashing his sword arm before killing him. Hauser informed Annabelle that he was sent by Daryl to monitor the situation between South Window and Two River, but when he arrived in Couscous, her men told him about where she was. Viktor then approaches with two counterfeit seals in his hand, proving that the war was orchestrated by the arms dealers. Zamji tied Kolong up and remained behind with Hauser and his men, while Annabelle and Viktor rode towards the river that separated South Window and Two River, where the battle would take place. The two armies were staring at each other across the river, and just as the battle was about to begin, Annabelle and Viktor rode in between the two armies, waving the Joustin flag. They presented the counterfeit seals and revealed that the war was orchestrated by arms dealers. Following this reveal, Grandmere and the Two River Army devoted their efforts to a peaceful resolution. Sometime later, Mayor Daryl of Muse intervened and helped cover up the events of what happened. He hid the news of the involvement of the arms dealers, he hid the existence of the vampire Neclord and how he turned the villagers into zombies. The issue was dealt with, but the truth was kept hidden from the public. 3 months later, Viktor was in Muse sharing a drink with Annabelle. The two spoke about what they were going to do next. Viktor revealed that he was setting out on a journey and that he won't return until he gets his revenge on Neclord. The two raised their glasses as they each said their vows to each other. Annabelle vowed to bring true peace to the city-states of Joustin, and Viktor vowed to defeat the vampire Neclord as they clinked their glasses together. And that's it for Viktor's backstory. As I mentioned at the beginning, this backstory came from a short story titled Ghostly Signposts in the Dark, which was included in the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 1 that released in Japan in August 2000. Quite a long backstory, it's 80 pages, which makes it the second longest short story in the books. By the way, Viktor is the only character to receive more than one short story in the books. He received a second short story in the Short Story Collection 2 book, which covered his travels when he left the Liberation Army after defeating Neclord. I'll cover that short story in a future video. If there are any other character short stories you want me to cover, let me know in the comments below. You can find a list of all characters who receive short stories in the pinned comment. Or if there are any other Suikoden related topics you want me to make videos on, do let me know. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.